there's a tension for dictators because, again, they're going to like need Bitcoin eventually. It's kind of telling that Putin didn't have Bitcoin in his plan, even though he knew he would get sanctioned, right? Like when he invaded Ukraine. Like likewise with China, the CCP on the cusp of its 100th anniversary banned Bitcoin mining. Like, and maybe it's because they hate it. They hate it with a passion because they think it's going to disrupt what they have. Even if they're not willing to admit that, that's what it is at a deep psychological level. And some people think that the current, like some people worry from an ideological perspective that disrupting what we have is bad. If we defend ourselves with Bitcoin, like we're not going to like stage a revolution. Bitcoin's a peaceful revolution. It's a gradual revolution. It doesn't, like most Americans are not going to go off to literally build a citadel in the middle of Texas or something and have their own gun thing and protect it. Like, and if we all have Bitcoin, then it really restrains what the government can do.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you like and comment below. And to find future episodes in your feed and push notifications, make sure you subscribe. And if you click the little bell, you'll get every new episode as it's released. Thanks again for watching. Today, I'm sitting down with Alex Gladstein, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at the Human Rights Foundation. Through his work, Alex has connected hundreds of dissidents and civil society groups with business leaders, technologists, journalists, philanthropists, policymakers, and artists to promote free and open societies. Alex's writings on human rights and technology have appeared in the New York Times, BBC, CNN, NPR, Time Magazine, The Washington Post, Wired Magazine, The Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, and much more. He has spoken at universities from MIT to Stanford, and he has briefed the European Parliament and the U.S. State Department, and he serves as a faculty at Singularity University and is an advisor to Blockchain Capital, which is a leading venture capital firm in the fintech industry. In today's conversation, we discuss Alex's recent book, Check Your Financial Privilege, and Alex will explain why Bitcoin matters for freedom. So with that said, let's dive in with the one and only Alex Gladstein. Hey guys, I'm going to take a quick pause to introduce the first sponsor on the Jay Gould Show. I am happy and proud to say that this show is now sponsored by Withum, Smith & Brown, which is a forward-thinking, technology-driven advisory and accounting firm that is committed to helping big and small companies be more profitable, efficient, and productive in today's complex business environment. Withum now also has a dedicated crypto and blockchain technology team to help early-stage businesses properly navigate all the crypto tax-related matters. I've been using Withum both personally and professionally for nearly a decade for all of my business's personal needs as well. I'm very happy with them and I highly recommend Withum. You can contact Withum by visiting their website at withum.com. Now back to the show. Alex, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I want to just dive right into your background. The first thing I want to do is just tell us where you're from, tell us a bit about where you grew up, maybe a socioeconomic background as a kid.
Sure. I grew up in Connecticut. I went to a public school there. I was fortunate to go to a good public school. I grew up just outside of New York City, rooting for New York sports teams, going into the city a lot. I ended up going to college in Boston. I did a lot of driving and Chinatown busing between New York and Boston for many years. I was fortunate to spend a year in London studying at a place called the School of Oriental and African Studies, which gave me a very different perspective than going to school in Connecticut and in Massachusetts. I was in classes with where most of the students were Muslim, for example, from Islamic countries, where there were just open classes taught about Marxism and other ideologies that were not that were like just not sort of taught in basically normal school in America. And even though I may disagree with them, I thought that was interesting that there was just more kind of diverse stuff on offer. So that was kind of eye-opening. And I ended up in 2007 starting to work for a new nonprofit in New York City in Manhattan called the Human Rights Foundation. But growing up, I was definitely a child of kind of 9/11 and the Iraq War that shaped all of my thinking. I was in, ninth grade or 10th grade, maybe, when 9/11 happened.
Mm.
Because of where I lived, a lot of people that I was friends with, their parents worked in the city. Some of them worked in the Trade Center, so it's very intense. I just remember that day. That I'll never forget that day. And then just I was kind of too young to really get a grip on what was happening, but that era of just like how did we react as a country to that was very formative to
Mm.
me. I ended up trying to study the Middle East and political science as a result. I was just sort of confused as to why we invaded Iraq. Like what how did?
So was everyone.
Yeah, but I mean, I remember in high school I was on the debate team and I had to get up and debate both sides. I remember this is like what they had us
Mm.
do at the time, and it was very strange to literally in front of this whole school, like hundreds and hundreds of kids having to go and debate in favor of the invasion and then to oppose it. I just remember that as well. And it's kind of, you can get a similar vibe by reading this book by this guy, Ian McEwan. It's called Saturday. It's an excellent fiction novel, but it's set during right during that time. And I think the way the author has it is that the protagonist, the father, is pro-war and the son is anti, and they go through all these same debates that like were in the news back then. But it's worth revisiting just because of how freaking like brainwashed we were, basically. like most Americans thought it was like a good
Yeah.
idea to like go blow up this country, which had nothing to do with 9/11, of
Nothing to
course,
do, yeah.
just nothing to do. And I guess we may revisit that later in this conversation. But no, that set like my career in action in terms of looking at international affairs. Then again, starting to work for the Human Rights Foundation, living in New York City for 3-4 years, right during the financial crisis. A lot of my friends were in finance, like kind of experiencing that as well. And then, just like literally friends who I was roommates with a couple guys who worked on Wall Street, who were just getting into their first jobs. and then like, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, it all happened. It was
Oh
like
my
really
God.
insane. I remember we were able to like negotiate our rent down because of how bad the economy was. It was kind of a crazy time. But I ended up just staying with the Human Rights Foundation. I applied to become an academic to study political science.
Mhm.
I got into a couple programs, but decided to actually just stay at the Human Rights Foundation, and I think that was a really good decision because it allowed me to do a lot of things, learn a lot about building an organization, fundraising, marketing, working in the media, connecting with people, making effective time and use of conferences and meetings, and learning the power of persuasion and how to communicate. All those things have been very helpful in my Bitcoin career as well. So spent like 10 years working at Href with people like Gary Kasparov and Thor Halvorson and kind of activists from around the world. Starting around 2017, started to get really into Bitcoin. I had been exposed to it previously. I think in 2010, Julian Assange spoke at the conference that I produced. It's called the Oslo Freedom Forum, and I met him in person in Norway. It was pretty crazy. When I met him, he was sitting in the breakfast room at the hotel where we hosted the conference at, and the first thing he said to me was like, "There's snipers on the roof," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Look over there," and I look, and there are, because by coincidence, Medvedev, who was then the president of Russia, he was doing this musical chairs thing with Putin so that Putin could just stay in power forever. So Medvedev was like briefly the president of Russia for a time, and he like happened to stay at the same hotel as us in the state visit to Norway. So it was really crazy. We had all these like Russian activists, Chechens, in the same hotel as the Russians. It was wild, and we had Assange there. And
It's funny how Assange recognizes that right away. It's like, for us, it's like this, right?
yeah,
Like
no,
this,
he's like
right?
sitting there, like sipping his coffee and just looking at this, and I'm like, ah,
He's like, by the way.
yeah. I mean, then obviously he's a key part of Bitcoin history because in
Yeah.
many ways his use of Bitcoin, arguably, you could argue, is what drove Satoshi away from the project. I think reading Pete Rizzo's stuff recently, it seems that Satoshi was already on the way out because of the power they, whoever they were, had, a group of people, who
Mhm.
knows. But it just seems that like maybe Hal, who knows. But the point is that they had fixed some huge bug earlier that year in 2010, and apparently it was quite clear that like this was very disconcerting for Satoshi, that they were able to kind of be a benevolent dictator. So I think they were already on the way out. But obviously, famously, one of their last statements was related to WikiLeaks and how we're poking the hornet's nest now, getting into actual politics, which I don't think they felt that Bitcoin was strong enough yet to repel, and they were probably right at that time. Thankfully nothing really came of it. But the following year, one of Assange's colleagues attended our event, and I remember I think they sold 30 Bitcoin to pay for a $1,500 conference ticket or something like that.
Oh my God.
And then in 2013, the first mention of Bitcoin in my email popped up, and it's because it was either 12 or 13. I think it was 13. I met a guy at a festival, and he was involved with this thing called Ephemeral. It was a floating festival out in the Sacramento River Delta out here in California that I used to attend, and it was conceived by I think the grandson of Milton Friedman, Patrick Friedman, and the seasteading community, all these people that wanted to live on basically floating island nations. And Peter Thiel, I think, seeded that whole thing. And I ended up meeting a bunch of early Bitcoin folks out there. And one of them, this guy's name is Idan Yago. He now works on bringing smart contracts to Bitcoin. But basically at the time, he was really into helping support Ukraine. And this was before Maidan Square, before the Russian invasion. So late 2013, it was September 2013, we did a fundraiser in Bitcoin with the Human Rights Foundation, and it's all documented on Reddit and stuff. It's pretty cool. But we basically raised a bunch of Bitcoin for activists there. And, Bitcoin wasn't worth much at the time, and it wasn't very well known, but we knew that it was it could do this thing. But to me, it was sort of a one-off at the time. I didn't really realize this thing would get huge later. So I kind of paid attention very loosely.
Let me ask you, why did you guys decide to take Bitcoin at that time? Because I had a customer that always wanted to pay us at that time around 2013. And I was like, why would I take it? Just give me the cash.
Well, so two things. So the fundraiser was not money that was coming into the Human Rights Foundation. It was, we helped publicize a campaign, and we ran a fundraiser because the activists didn't have bank accounts. They got closed down, or they didn't want the government to know. So they wanted it in Bitcoin. And of course, at the time, back then, everybody thought Bitcoin was anonymous, right? So, but in any event, it's not like they got caught or anything. It worked. It was good. But then the next year, 2014, we got our first donation in Bitcoin. No, and basically one of our donors was like, "I want to pay for my conference ticket in Bitcoin," and we were like, "Okay, how do we do that?" So they showed us how to set up a wallet. I think we had a Coinbase account, and I don't know, just a bunch of other people started donating Bitcoin as well. And we had kind of let's say phase one was 2014 to 2017, where it was this kind of just this loose idea that we didn't actually end up doing anything with. I had a couple encounters that started to change my thinking. A friend of mine introduced me to Bitstein. In 2016, we had dinner. At first I was like, this guy's crazy. But a couple of things he said left me thinking. And then another friend of mine was on the board of Bitfury, the mining company. And he was like, listen, let's just do a workshop at your event with activists and Bitcoiners. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So spring of 2017, we did it in May. So Bitcoin had just a few months earlier broken $1,000. People were starting to get again, and people were starting to get interested. It was a very exciting time. Obviously, the whole scaling wars were happening, and it was nuts. So that was a crazy summer. And we ended up doing the event, and during the event, the Bitcoin broke $2,000, and it just started to get really crazy. I remember that really vividly. And then that year, I just spent the whole time just learning as much as I could, just watching every single Andreas Antonopoulos video, trying to interview as many people as I could, going through the whole blockchain crypto thing that almost everybody has to go. It's almost like trial by fire, right? So thinking, I remember listening to that podcast that Tim Ferriss had that summer with Naval Ravikant and Nick Szabo, and they're talking about Filecoin and all this stuff. And as a human rights activist, it was really exciting. The ideas that they presented were very exciting. Oh, cool. We could take advantage of storage and have a decentralized server infrastructure. but like it took me years to start at. I mean, it took me a long time to start asking the deep questions about, well, why do you need a token? Like, what's like kind of the deal
Mhm.
here? Like, and a lot of those projects obviously have totally collapsed
Yeah.
from that era. But like, the point is, I started to realize the signal around Bitcoin later that year, and I just couldn't read enough about it. Like most people, you just focus on it obsessively. So by summer of 18, I was like, I kind of had gone through the whole like,
Mhm.
okay, like yes, there's some stuff happening in the wider industry, but I'm really excited about Bitcoin. That was like my thing. And then yeah, we just started to do more and more of it at the Human Rights Foundation. I started to feel comfortable enough to start writing about it in the media. And the last 4 years have basically just been just like growing, growing on that ever since. And just talking to human rights activists starting in 17, 18, just asking them questions about money and realizing that this thing's broken around the world, and that very, very few people in the West had an understanding of why Bitcoin would help.
Hmm. This is the thing right here that you're about to get to, because I gotta tell you, Alex, like I have a lot of friends that are
Hmm.
like in their 60s or late 50s,
Yeah.
and have made a lot of money, and they see it as like it's just a like a Ponzi scheme, or it's just an opportunistic capitalistic kind of, just trying to get rich quick. And
Man.
I would love for you to now talk about Check Your Financial
Yeah.
Privilege, the
Well,
book, and
that's
the impetus of that. Yeah.
yeah. So my career arc took me to this moment where I
Hmm.
realized, 3, 4 years ago, that what was preventing people from understanding the power of Bitcoin was their essentially their financial privilege. And
Hmm.
I believe I want to credit Alan Farrington, I think, for the original use of the term, that at least that I saw,
Sure.
which inspired my original essay, which inspired the book, which inspired all these other things. But basically, I realized that most everybody who I talked to, whether it was strangers on the internet that I was arguing with, or like people in person that would be very critical of it or think it was a waste or stupid, had the benefit of being born into an extremely privileged position like me, where we
Hmm.
grew up into a money system that like wasn't, obviously broken, that worked really well, where most people can pretty easily get a loan or send money to family or friends, or and especially in my life, I'm 36, so enjoy low interest rates, like all these things,
Hmm.
like our money system worked in a particular way. And that's the milieu, that's the environment in which journalists who write for the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, or who brief the State Department, who work for USAID, or who work for the Treasury or OFAC or whatever, they all go to these schools in America or Europe, and they enjoy this like privileged position, and all of their thinking is built in that framework. So they never think about what it's like in Sudan or whatever. And even if they do spend time as whether it's a Peace Corps or whatever, like they hardly ever think about the money or currency piece. It's like, oh yeah, the money just
Yeah.
sucks here. Like it's like they don't actually think about the structure of the world and how these things are related. Like it, like it's almost like in political science, there's this idea of dependency theory, where you have, it's from like basically colonial theory, where you have like the core, the colonial metropole, or like the basically the masters, and then you have the periphery, right? And this is kind of what it looks like, right? So today you have, if you just think about trade into the international level, you have highly developed economies that import raw goods from the emerging markets and finish them and then sell them back, and they just perpetuates the global like inequality, let's say. And the people who live in the metropole, in the core, enjoy a much stronger economies and much more advanced financial technology than the people in the periphery. But the reality is the core is quite small in terms of human population. The core, which I would define as like people who have liberal democracy with property rights, with reasonably secure property rights, and a reserve currency, so a currency that they use, the lifeblood of their economy, is so strong enough that other central banks would want to actually save in it. We're talking maybe 12, 13% of the population of the world.
Hmm.
So a little more than 1 billion people. So we're talking almost 7 billion people that live in the periphery, let's say, whose societies literally kind of exist to serve up and extract raw goods and stuff and export it to the core. This is like
Mhm.
it's kind of a generalization, but it's kind
Mhm.
of depressingly true if you think about this sort of way the world works. And the people who live in the core have just this enormous financial privilege. And of course, they look at something like Bitcoin. They're like, well, Bitcoin, like obviously this thing must be for criminals. Like
Right.
obviously it's too volatile to use. Like it's probably burning the oceans too. Like whatever. Like, and they look at it and they hate it. They hate it with a passion because they think it's going to disrupt what they have. Even if they're not willing to admit that, that's what it is at a deep
Subconscious.
psychological level. And some people think that the current, like some people worry from an ideological perspective that disrupting what we have is bad. Like they believe that, yes, this is popular among the left. Like, yes, it's all screwed up and screw the Democrats. And of course they hate the Republicans, but like, they think it's just the wrong use of state power. Like if we could just get the right people into office, then we could like raise minimum wage and we could
Yeah, maybe next time it'll work. Right.
we could break up the big banks and we could implement our vision or whatever. But it's like
Yeah.
this is not going to happen. So and,
No.
and even if it did, it would not end the way they think it would end, right? So the point is that like there still exists this belief that like that government money can be the solution. I'm someone who believes that practically speaking, we'll always have government issued debt. Like, I mean, forever. It doesn't matter what the money is. Like, we're gonna
Right.
people are always gonna issue debt. It's going to be priced very differently in the future. It won't be at 0.08%, right? Or like whatever. Like, this is just not going to happen in the Bitcoin standard. So we look at like the world today, and the reason that I started to do all the research that went into the book was that I was just curious about why people around the world turned to this thing. What were their lives like, and how did we get here
Mm.
today? Both like how did Bitcoin get here, and also how did the dollar get here? So the book is like kind of a twin exploration of like Bitcoin adoption globally, and also a history, kind of a side by side, like a history of the dollar. Like how did the dollar get to its apex? Like how did we go from a world where um, money was based on an asset, gold, basically, to a
Mhm.
world where money was based on a liability, U.S. debt. Like, how did that happen? So that was something that emerged over 2 years of writing and reporting. And I wrote the book in an interesting way, as some will obviously know, that I wrote the chapters individually as essays. I published them. I collected feedback from around the world on each one, and then I put them all together in a chronological order, or not all of them, but most of them together. And so I kind of wrote the book out in the open, which was a really fun experience. But I think it makes for a nice package. So yeah, grateful to be on talking about it with you today.
So you wrote in there, Bitcoin is a Trojan horse for freedom. Can we just go through that?
Yeah, I mean,
Explain.
this is basically my theory of,
Yeah.
or thesis of Bitcoin's adoption mechanism. That most people will
Mhm.
adopt Bitcoin out of self-interest, not because they're altruistic or because they care
Mhm.
about um, freedom or human rights, or they have empathy or whatever. No, I think they're going to adopt Bitcoin, whether they be individuals, companies, or governments. I think they're going to adopt Bitcoin because whatever, fiat's a melting ice cube. I mean, at the end of the day, like
Incentives. Mhm.
they want to put more food on the table for their family. They want their company to have a stronger balance sheet. They want their country to not go starving when
Mhm.
fiat money collapses. It's a kind of a it's sort of a brutal, naked, stark decision. People will realize this later. Like most people don't understand this
Yeah.
now, but like it's a silly question almost in a way. Like not you asking it, but the world asking it. Why would you want harder money versus softer money? Like it's like I mean, like if you have the gold standard, who wants silver? Like this should be, if you have gold, who wants wampums or glass beads? Like I mean, Sailor talks a lot about this, and it's
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he's just as obvious. Like, what if you have Argentine pesos?
I love his
Like,
analogies.
why would you want like rather if you're making dollars, it's not like you're gonna like take profit back into the peso. This is insane. So,
Yeah.
but people don't realize that Bitcoin is like the sort of hardest money yet, so they don't grok it. But once they do,
Yeah.
it's like Okay.
There's a clicking moment.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
once you have that clicking moment, you realize. So all these actors around and this is the brilliance of Satoshi's design. All these people are gonna like get Bitcoin because they for self-interested reasons. We don't need
Yeah.
philanthropy or altruism to make the world a better place. Satoshi figured out how to get into our most base instincts and use that to push the project forward. So there's just no empathy required here. It's just like
Yeah.
everything is just aligned so beautifully. And what happens then is that it basically is a Trojan horse. And I talked through obviously the actual story, but like basically what it amounts to is that the Greeks couldn't take Troy by force. They wanted to take it, they couldn't take it, the walls were too big, and the army ended up starving, and they were about to give up and go home, and Odysseus gets this vision from this god implanted in his head, right, of like how to use subterfuge and trickery instead. And that's kind of like the way that I see Satoshi kind of attacking the financial system. And if I think it was Hayek who said something like somebody would have to create a sly way, to get, to replace the current money system. This is sort of what Satoshi came
Mhm.
up with a few decades later, was like this subterfuge and trickeration, where much like Odysseus made this horse, which was then brought into um, Troy by the Trojans because they thought it was like beautiful and cool and valuable. You're going to have all these companies and governments or whatever like adopting Bitcoin because it looks cool and beautiful and it's hard money and all these things, NGU. But what they either don't realize or they have to basically grin and bear and just deal with is that it's FGU inside. It's freedom go up technology. It's a
Yep.
radical cypherpunk technology that can't be controlled. And it's like, it's just such a cool adoption mechanism. And it was really the only way to do it. I mean, otherwise, if we're going to rely on altruism and philanthropy to make the world a better place, I'm sorry to break it to you, but it's not going to work. I mean, that is
Yeah.
why we have the Uyghurs in concentration camps and nobody gives a shit. Like, this is below my line. This is that's the way the world works pre-Bitcoin. But Bitcoin changes the way the world works because guess what? Like the CCP, fast forward 30 years from now, the CCP cannot ignore Bitcoin. Like they're going to have to like probably and much sooner than that. They're could be like a couple years from now, but like they're gonna need it, like because what are they gonna do? Sit in a world where all their rivals are using a better money than they are? No,
Yeah.
they're gonna have to have it, and it's very structure because it's open source and permissionless. Like, what are they gonna do? Adopt it and then just their citizens can't have it? That's not going to work. Like Satoshi very carefully looked at how the world defeated gold as money through Executive Order 6102, through Bretton Woods,
Hmm.
through
Hmm.
the Nixon shock, and all these things. And they chose April 5th as a birthday, and they chose 73 as the birth year because they were studying the fate of gold. This is really obvious, and it's interesting that they figured out a way for us to go back to like a neutral open money that can't be manipulated by bureaucrats. um I just think that's fascinating. So the Trojan horse theory, yeah, is basically that Satoshi figured out a way to make the world a better place, but the incentives are self-interest and, to be frank, greed instead of altruism and philanthropy.
So Russia recently, with the whole conflict going on, said that they would. It was a small statement, but they said that they may accept Bitcoin for payment, and
Yeah.
this is a threat potentially to the petrodollar system for the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency.
Hmm.
You talk about the petrodollar in the book. Would you like to kind of touch on that and explain that to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean,
I mean, I doubt that there's going to be anything big there
yeah,
in
I
the
mean,
short
just to
term, but
finish on the Russia piece,
Mhm.
there's a tension for dictators because again, they're gonna like need Bitcoin eventually.
Mhm.
Um, it's kind of telling that Putin didn't have Bitcoin in his plan, even though he knew he would get sanctioned, right? Like by when he invaded Ukraine, like
Right.
you know, look, his opponents use it. Dissidents in Russia use it. Like I don't think he's
Mhm.
crazy about pushing the adoption of this thing that he can't control. Likewise with China, the CCP on the cusp of its 100th anniversary banned Bitcoin mining.
Mhm.
Like, and maybe it's because they knew that energy would become a premium. There's different theories, but clearly, like they don't like the idea. It's not very harmonious, to use their word, or pure, to have this thing that they can't control, that the citizens can use without them knowing about it. Like this is not good. So
Mm-hmm.
they want to reduce the use of Bitcoin in China. That's like very, very clear. So dictators don't like it, and look, anything that a dictator doesn't like, I'm naturally very interested in, right? So hell yeah, let's explore this thing. But as far as the petrodollar
Wait, I
thing,
just got to ask you: are you calling Elizabeth Warren a dictator?
well, sadly, elected officials in democracies haven't done their homework on this thing because, as I have a chapter on this, but Bitcoin I think is very American in its values, like, and not the way America has unfolded with all of its
Mm.
problems and genocide of Native Americans and unnecessary wars and the surveillance state and fiat central banking and all this nonsense that we had to deal with.
The idea of America, yeah.
No, it's the ideals as written up in the Declaration of
Mm-hmm.
Independence are awesome, and inspired the world. Continue to inspire the world. And Bitcoin kind of is those ideals. It's free speech, it's property rights, and it's open
Mm-hmm.
capital markets and commerce. Like that's what it is. Like if you think about it, and that's going to be really bullish for an open society that relies on voluntarism and collaboration and peaceful commerce just to thrive. Like that's going to be a very good environment for Bitcoin. It's going to be disastrous for tyrannical governments that require, instead of free speech, they need censorship. Instead of property rights, they need confiscation. Instead of open capital markets, they need closed capital markets. The only
Mm-hmm.
reason the ruble and the yuan are like worth what they're worth today is because of currency manipulation and closed capital
Mm-hmm.
markets. The government can use violence and force and the threat of killing you to basically force you to sell your foreign exchange for the local currency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's very good for democracies and or at least decent, at least like good for democracies, and it'll help them reform. I know that the Bitcoin community is split between on this idea of democracy. I actually think Bitcoin will improve democracy a lot. I don't think it's gonna I think democracy is good. I think like rule of the people is much better than rule by a tyrant. Like I think this is a progress in human nature. Um, I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but that's something I strongly believe based on all the work I've done in the last 15 years. Like you talk to people like in most countries, like they don't want to live under like the boot of a tyrant. I mean, that's no, they want to have rights and freedoms, and they want to be independent. And I think that's human dignity, and I think that those aren't like European values. I think those are universal values. But anyway, I think that at the end of the day, uh, you have a technology that's going to, I think, benefit open societies, which is good. When it comes to the petrodollar, it's really interesting. I feel like before, even just a few months ago, the petrodollar was like treated as like a conspiracy theory by like mainstream economics, which is crazy because in the 70s it was like, if you can go back and look at microfiche and read books from the era, and these, I mean, it was totally a normal thing. Like everybody acknowledged it. Of course, it's the petrodollar. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was so obvious. Like, I mean, it was out in the open. Like the Saudis came to Washington D.C. in the summer of '73. Nixon went to Saudi Arabia. Like he sent his Treasury Secretary to Jeddah. Like he hired a bond salesman off Wall Street from Salomon Brothers to be the Treasury Secretary to sell bonds to the Saudis. That's what happened. Like this is all
Mm-hmm.
real. This is all totally normal American history. So we figured out a way to sort of fix, in a way, the dollar to black gold after we took it off real gold, right? And we basically kind of pegged, in a way, the dollar to the energy markets by getting the Saudis to price everything in dollars and recycle that debt back into US, rather recycle those petrodollars, those dollar profits from selling oil and other resources, by taking those profits and investing them back into US Treasury securities. That was this idea of petrodollar recycling, and that system worked really well for about 50 years. It allowed interest rates to be like a lot lower than otherwise they could be. It gave the U.S. government like a huge marginal buyer for its debt. And now that we're seeing the system unravel, now like the mainstream talks about it like it's a normal thing, and it's so crazy that like even just 2 years ago, it was considered like the kind of stuff when I was doing the research, like end of 20, I guess 19, end of 2020, early 2021. I mean, I was digging out some weird books, man, like that definitely are sketchy. Like, but there wasn't like that much information about the petrodollar elsewhere. And you know what? I had to read those books carefully and realize like, oh, 80% of this is nonsense. But here, no, here's some signal. And then that would lead me somewhere else, and that would lead me somewhere else. And eventually, I would just pour through all the like popular economics and financial history books of the day, and I would just look I would just see if the petrodollar was mentioned. And you know what? It was in a few of them, especially in David Graeber's Debt. It has a fantastic section on that. Of course, Bitcoiners would obviously disagree with David Graeber, but Graeber has an awesome section on the petrodollar. It's really, really good. And I think that in many ways that some of the better critics of the dollar system are actually on the left, or Marxist even. We disagree on the answer, but they have a very good understanding of the problems of the sort of exploitative problems of the dollar system. So this petrodollar system, reigned for 50 years, and a lot of people think it's like basically coming to an end for two reasons. Number one, the way it would work, where essentially everything would be kind of priced in dollars. If you think about like when the Saudis would sell oil, you'd have a commodity buyer or like a commodity institution like Glencore involved in these transactions. Like the purchasing would be done in dollars. The um, futures on it would be done in dollars to protect your investment. All these things, all the hedging would be done in so you have this one thing done in dollars, but then it spawns this huge amount of derivatives, all also priced in dollars. So over the years, like it really helped the dollar become this like financial instrument as well. And the petrodollar system in the 70s really helped jumpstart the eurodollar system also, which is kind of like the petrodollar eurodollar system, but essentially like the dollar being the numeraire for energy and finance and being the premium collateral for financial markets was something that came out of this thing. And it reigns till today. Now that's being threatened right now. I would say pretty inarguably by again two factors. One is that when it comes to, it's like stock and flow. When it comes to flow, the flows are going to start to be priced in other currencies. So when Saudi Arabia, which sells 25% of its oil to China, they're going to start selling it in RMB. I mean, it's like they don't want dollars necessarily because those two countries are geopolitical rivals and they don't want their stuff to get frozen by the US government. So they're going to start.
But that's because of what's recently happened with all the freezing of accounts and stuff. I mean,
Well, that's what I'm saying. So yeah, people are saying the petrodollar system was like basically 73 to 2022, like RIP. Like basically, there's this one guy who writes for Credit Suisse. He talks about Bretton Woods 1 was like 44 to 71, which is when the dollar was backed by gold at $35 per ounce of gold, right? And then 71 to 73, it changes, right? Nixon, closes the gold window. We figure out the petrodollar. He says Bretton Woods 2 is from then, the early 70s, to like February of 2022. And then he says Bretton Woods 3 begins the day that the G7 freezes the Russian central bank's reserves, right? So, and again, I'm describing stock and flow. So on the flow side, again, it's that other countries are going to start pricing stuff in different currencies, which clearly reduces the amount of demand for dollars and dollar contracts. Secondly, and the collateral needed to secure those contracts, most importantly, but also stock. So you have central banks that hold an enormous amount of U.S. treasuries as the premium financial collateral, as the best money in the world. Well, guess what? They've now realized very quickly that that's not the best money in the world because it can get friggin' frozen, right? So they're going to be diversifying, to use a euphemism. They're going to be selling off. They're going to be selling off treasuries.
They have been buying gold and stockpiling for years.
Yeah, no, and this is a pattern. No, they knew. Look, I mean, like after the Great Financial Crisis and after the Iraq War sort of peaked, and we continued to invest all this money in these forever wars, like foreign central banks were like, wait a second, if we have all these, they looked at their savings basically.
We're just increasing our debt.
No, well, they looked at the fact that they had all this. So China went from having about $200 billion of U.S. debt securities to a 1.3 trillion between 2004 and 2011. So they had just gotten into WTO, and basically what was happening was it was like an extension of the petrodollar system. They were making all this stuff, and Americans were buying it, and with the dollar profits, they were recycling that back into U.S. debt. Okay, this was in many ways what it caused an amazing demand for U.S. debt, and there's all kinds of people called it the savings glut, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of descriptors for it, but like it was a known issue in the 2000s that like, oh my God, there's like so many people that want to buy our debt. It's like messing with the yield curve and all these things. And then after the world saw that we, in a very different context from the late 70s, early 80s, and Luke Groman has done a great job kind of teasing this out, but like with Volcker like basically was tasked with upholding the world's reserve currency. And Volcker said, we're going to save the world reserve currency at the expense of the American economy. And Volcker raised interest rates and made the dollar stronger at the expense of the U.S. government. Bernanke was the total opposite. So Bernanke sacrificed the world reserve currency for the banks. So totally opposite thing. And, China and other countries realized this. So over the last 8 years, foreign central banks have bought 3 times as much gold as treasuries. So even the system was already unraveling. I mean, this was clear. I mean, I wrote my piece a year ago. Lynn Alden had like a really incredible piece that inspired that piece a few months earlier at the end of, I think, 2020. So people were like looking at this like well before the Russian government, way well before this war broke out. Writing was on the wall. Luke Groman, again, has been talking about this for years. The writing was on the wall if you cared to look, that like the dollar apex was being reduced like over time. But this just expedites the process because, again, now you have countries that are actually going to start pricing in other currencies for the flow. And then on the stock side, they're going to be selling off their treasuries. So to me, that environment's very interesting because if you're a foreign central bank and you want a reserve asset that can't be frozen, you want something called outside money, right? Like that's not anybody's liability. So that's gold. But like gold is a rock that you have to put on like a ship or a boat or a truck. Like it's kind of not very helpful in the 21st century economy. So it's like sitting in a basement somewhere. So, I mean, gold is just not going to cut it. So I think that even though they're afraid of Bitcoin and they don't know what Bitcoin is, eventually they will figure out, and there's information asymmetry in today's world. Like most people just don't know what Bitcoin is. They'll figure out that Bitcoin is the only outside money online. It's the only digital outside money in the world. It's the only digital money that's not somebody else's liability. That's it. Everything else. Now, I mean, we can argue about the other digital fiat currencies and digital cryptocurrencies, but like even Ethereum, which you would say would be very difficult to freeze. Okay, guess what? All of its rules are changing. They're completely dynamic. We have no idea how much Ethereum will be printed in the next few years. It's just like nobody knows. So the point is that even these other systems have strengths. They're not comparable to Bitcoin. They're still somebody else's liability. They're still someone else's thing to change if they wish. And that really sets Bitcoin apart. And I think that it's what will make it naturally the dominant reserve currency of the world. And that's kind of in many ways, the thesis of my book is that what's cool is that you have this thing that's being used by individuals in adverse circumstances.
So let me ask you. So you believe across the world over time will buy that and peg their currency to it? Why would you need it? You just use the dollar. Would they have a multi-peg in some way, or how do you envision that happening?
Well, I think
you're going to want to have.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be black and white. I think what happens is almost a reversal of the last several hundred years, like just mirrored. So what happened is we went from having literal gold standard of like literally a basement of gold or whatever.
Right. Nobody knows what it really was.
Right. To a gold exchange standard, which was created in the wake of World War I and really kind of perfected by the Americans in 1944, which is that we'd all use these pieces of paper, but they'd be redeemable for gold at a certain rate, like at a fixed rate. So you could redeem your marks at this rate and you could redeem your dollars at this rate or whatever. And then eventually we said, just kidding, it's not going to be any sort of gold standard. It's just going to be fiat, the post-71 political economy. So if you could think about going the other way, this is something I think is quite possible. We start to live in a world where central banks start to realize how important gold is. Okay, rather digital gold, Bitcoin is. Okay, so they start accumulating a little bit. And then over time, it becomes clear that it's better performing and just more useful and better as a reserve asset than this other stuff, like any sort of paper or whatever. So it ends up becoming a really big part of their savings account. I don't know if it's like entirely,
Right.
I think they do diversify
Maybe it's a
with
gold and that or
well,
something. I
they'll
don't know.
still like there's still going to be things that generate more short-term yield, obviously,
Mhm.
than Bitcoin in any circumstance. So
Sure.
they'll diversify. They'll still have securities and other things,
Mhm.
but like I basically think we'll head to this direction where treasuries of corporations, of governments, of families, like savings will basically be done in Bitcoin or mostly or a huge part in Bitcoin. And then like that government that issues fiat currency, that currency will be redeemable for Bitcoin at a certain exchange rate. Let's put it that way. And then eventually, maybe that breaks down, and we just end up just using Bitcoin as money. So that would be like kind of a full reversal to going back to when we used gold as actual money, which was very
Yeah.
impractical because gold isn't very good as a medium exchange. It's a terrible
No.
medium exchange. It's a very good store of value. It's a pretty good unit of account. It's a bad medium exchange. So we could look at a world where one thing is really good at all three things,
Mhm.
and then it just solves a lot of problems in the world. So
They won't go down without a fight though, because they can't control the
no,
money supply. And yeah.
yeah, no, and that's why it's so important that we custody our own Bitcoin. Like it's
Mhm.
so important that governments don't control Bitcoin, and that the exchanges, which can be captured by governments, don't control the
Mhm.
Bitcoin. So in many ways, exchanges almost act as a they're kind of it's weird. They're on the one hand a massive vulnerability, obviously, because they can get just seized by a government. But on the other
Yeah.
hand, some of them are like operating outside of the control of major governments. Like they're kind of this interesting check on power. And they will get very powerful. Like basically, if you think about how huge companies like Coinbase and like
Mm.
the FTX, like think about how big these companies are going to be in 5 years. I mean, they're going
Yeah.
to
With
be
the balance
they're
sheets.
going to be the
Yeah.
Rockefellers,
Mhm.
man. They're going to be the biggest companies in the world, and
Yeah.
and they're going to have enormous state level power.
Mhm. Mhm.
They're going to have the kind of power that Google has today, or that Standard Oil had 100 years ago, or whatever.
Mhm.
And guess what? They're going to push to keep Bitcoin legal, like because that's like the bedrock of their business, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. They're definitely a risk, and we want to be cognizant of that risk. And as educators and activists, we want to be encouraging people to take their money off of exchanges, okay, or at least take their Bitcoin off of
Yep.
exchanges. At the same time, it's interesting that they may end up being. I mean, ally might be too strong of a word, but definitely like a chess piece here where they end up fighting for the rights of their users, and we don't have to. Like they're going to have the billions of dollars of marketing budget to fight the U.S.
Mhm.
government,
Yeah.
whereas you and I don't have to do anything. Like we'll just sit
Yeah.
and have popcorn, like and just watch.
Let
Like
SBF and
yeah, let
Corey do
them
it.
fight. And like, look, they're going to fight for all kinds of stuff that maybe you and I don't care about, but they're definitely
Yeah.
going to fight for self custodial use of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So we'll see. I'm
Can I
interested to
just
see
jump
how
on the
that.
CBDC topic
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
second
yeah,
here, Alex? So
yeah.
yeah, so I just wanted to bring this up because we're running on time here.
Sure.
So let me okay, so I have a note here. March 25th, right?
Hmm.
Janet Yellen appeared on CNBC Squawk Box with Andrew Sorkin. And a lot of
Hmm.
people they thought that this was a positive thing for Bitcoin. I didn't really hear it the same way in my ear. Just curious because I talked to you before we jumped on, and you said you saw the interview too. But I'm just going to read something from the transcript here. Sorkin said Russia had said that they would accept Bitcoin as a payment for their energy resources. What does that say to you about where we are in the crypto conversation? And Yellen said, well, crypto is obviously grown by leaps and bounds and it's playing a significant role, not really so much in the transactions like we were just talking about, medium exchange,
Yeah.
but in investment decisions of lots of Americans. And President Biden just issued a couple of weeks ago the executive order tasking us and other agencies with thinking about the the regulation of crypto. And then Sorkin says to her, does that mean that you're less skeptical than you have been in previous? I mean, we've been talking about this together for a long time now, and you've had some skepticism about crypto and technology. And she said, this is the part that rang differently to my ear than it has for a lot of my friends in Bitcoin. She said, I have a little bit of skepticism because, well, she says, I think there are valid concerns around it. Some have to do with the financial stability, investor protections, and the use of illicit transactions and other things. On the other hand, she said there have been benefits from the crypto, and she recognizes that the innovation in the payment system. So it seems to me that she's just talking about a CBDC. That's what it seems to me. Like I don't know. How do you hear that?
Well, okay.
And,
So there's
and why?
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's like three shades of gray here. There's China. Let's just think about China,
Mhm.
Europe, and America as three paradigms, three regulatory paradigms, with maybe India and Nigeria being closer to China than the rest. Okay, so China, you have an authoritarian government. 54% of the world's population lives under an authoritarian government, which basically says we're going to highly regulate or restrict the use of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies among our population. In fact, we're going to ban all these uses of it. Like you can't exchange RMB for Bitcoin, you can't mine it, all these things. We're just banning it. We're just trying to take the
Mhm.
ban tactic. Okay, then you have Europe, which is like middle ground where the ECB is posturing as Bitcoin is evil, it's terrible, it's for criminals. Like we're going to save you with the
Bad for the
CBDC.
environment.
Okay,
Mhm.
it's bad news. Like they don't have the same authoritarian power as China, but they're definitely trying to posture to create a financial environment where it's very difficult for Europeans to use Bitcoin. Okay, then you have America, which is very interesting because of our decentralization of power. Um, you have the State Department and the Treasury Department, and you have Congress, and you have Senate, and you have the House, and you have court system, and like let's just put it this way: there is no consensus on Bitcoin in the United States right now. It's not
Mhm.
like Europe where all the bureaucrats are like, yeah, like we don't like that. And I know proof of work didn't get banned in Europe or whatever. I know there is a
Mhm.
bit of a debate, but generally speaking, they're like not bullish on it. China's definitely not bullish on it. So, but you have
Mhm.
America where there are tons of bullish politicians who are like totally excited about Bitcoin, and this is becoming hugely bipartisan. I mean, yes, we know the more high profile ones are Republican, but like let me tell you, there's a whole bunch of like sitting congressmen and women and senators and like candidates who are going to unseat incumbents who are pro Bitcoin, pro cryptocurrency. This is going to happen. I mean, this is in the next 2 years going to
Mhm.
become a
Mhm.
thing where essentially, I mean, there was something today about how, and as to my point before about these big crypto exchanges being like kind of maybe unlikely allies with Bitcoin, they're going to fund like they're going to fund some of these candidates to the gills, like on the Democrat side.
Mhm.
So you're seeing like incumbents that are going to get felled by, sort of pro Bitcoin, pro cryptocurrency candidates. It's kind of amazing. And, you look, you have Ted Cruz, who's all about Bitcoin for Texas, but you also have Ro Khanna on the left, and he's very pro Bitcoin. So I think you're going to start seeing this thing happen. And what is Yellen going to do? I mean, she's not Christine Lagarde and she's not Xi Jinping. It's a different system in America. You're going to have a lot of people who are extremely excited about Bitcoin in America because it resonates with private property and free speech and stuff like that and like capitalism. So people are going to be pretty jazzed about it. So
Mhm.
I think what's interesting is that she's changed her tune while still being like, yes, we need to be on the offensive against FedCoin for sure.
Mhm.
It's interesting that like the government has gone from in America saying that Bitcoin is for criminals and it's bad for the environment to now basically saying, and not only in the TV interview you mentioned, but she gave a big speech like about a week ago that I
Mhm.
shared a clip of the other day where, I mean, she went basically, they've gone from, I mean, Trump and Mnuchin were like, they hated Bitcoin. So like, and Hillary Clinton hates Bitcoin, all this stuff, but they've basically gone from like, it's terrible to actually a lot of Americans own it and it's an investment asset, but we don't think it can be used as a currency because that's what they're afraid of. They don't want it to be used as a currency. Look, they
Yeah.
have no choice but to accept it as a financial asset at this point. What, like 40 to 60 million Americans own Bitcoin or
Mhm.
cryptocurrency? What are they going to do? The genie's out of the bottle. So I think
Mhm.
that when she gets up on that stage and she speaks about Bitcoin and she starts by talking about how it's this remarkable innovation and that Satoshi
Yeah.
Nakamoto, she talks about Satoshi in the white paper.
I
It's like,
saw
what
that.
the heck is
Yeah,
going
I saw
on?
your clip.
Like, this is not something Christine Lagarde or Xi Jinping is going to do.
I
Trust
thought it
me.
was like a deep fake or
Me
something.
too. And then I checked; it was real. So it's just it looks weird, but like it's
Yeah, it
100%
didn't look
real.
right. The
And
background, the whole thing.
she says, well, but like no one's using it as a currency, and that's what Powell says too. So the new U.S. government narrative is that it's fine as a speculative asset for Americans to hold.
Yeah.
We'll see if they allow them to have an ETF. I mean, we'll see, but like, but that it's not going to be a currency. Well, that's currently where they are. Well, I would say that's a big victory, because
Yeah.
that means that
Yeah.
like the public has pushed their position, I think, in a very favorable direction. Obviously, she's still pushing. The CBDC is coming. I mean,
Yeah.
the big, as you say, the big theme
Mhm.
of that speech that she gave was not Bitcoin. It was, in fact, the fact that she was prepping for people to get comfortable with the fact that a CBD is coming, like that the
Mhm.
CBDC is coming. But you know what? A CBDC is like a giant advertisement for Bitcoin. It's a tool of unrestrained, easy monetary
You're just
policy.
training people on wallets.
Well, not only that, it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't think you'll like. It's still a liability of somebody, so you can't actually take self custody of it, right? It's like
Right, right.
it's not even like I mean, cash you can withdraw. Cash can still be demonetized and it can be inflated away, but like at least you could have it. Like what you have it on your phone, no, it could just get frozen. Like it's not like you're gonna have like the keys to
Yeah,
your.
but for the users, they don't know that yet.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
they'll just get used to they'll
But
get used to
but
the
the
use
point is,
case.
these CBDCs will be a
Yeah.
political weapon. Like it's not like Alex Jones will be allowed to have a CBDC. No way. So it'll be a political weapon. Number one, there'll be all kinds of issues with like using it with like friends who live in sanctioned countries. Number two, or like have it.
Yeah.
It won't. Can't imagine it working that well abroad. Number two. And number three, it's going to be a tool of expansionary monetary policy. Like it's basically a programmable stimmy. Like if everybody's got a CBDC account, and the government knows all this information about you, they can use like big data analysis and they can just be like, oh, there's a downturn in the auto industry. Oh, how about we just put $1,000 into everybody's pocket there and they'll
Right.
shut
It's like
up.
ABI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is what China wants to do. It's what the Fed the Fed and the Treasury would love to do. But guess what?
But to your point, they could take it too.
Well, not only that, but it's a giant advertisement for Bitcoin because it's going to make fiat currency weaker in value because it's going to introduce like look. The problem with democratic governments is that they'll always choose inflation over restraint because it's the incentive system. I think Bitcoin helps fix that actually in the long run. If we do go to what I was saying, where there's a world where we have like a Bitcoin exchange system or even a Bitcoin standard fully, well, they can't choose inflation like that like if they wish to print more of their fiat, it's gonna have massive consequences. They can't just do this magic trick thing where they deficit finance and then have the central bank buy the debt. This whole thing doesn't work. Deficit financing QE thing doesn't work with a Bitcoin standard. Like it just doesn't work. It works in a fiat currency standard where you can export the costs to the future and to other people, but not in a Bitcoin standard. So I think that it's a giant advertisement for Bitcoin. So we'll see. So it's incumbent upon us as Americans, I think, to educate our fellow Americans about Bitcoin and to make sure that we're kind of it's like an invisible clause in the Constitution now. Like it should be there, like the right to bear Bitcoin. Like this is in there, and like we got to make sure everybody knows about this. And look, we're not like I think most Americans just want to they want to just go along with their lives and take care of their family, and they want to enjoy their job and they want to enjoy their time off and they want to live in America. And I think most Americans aren't ANCAPs. Like they're
This is like the part of this book where you talk about the financial repression. It's like at the end of the day, like you can't save anymore, right? It's just that's gone.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that like I don't think that if we defend ourselves with Bitcoin, like we're not going to like stage a revolution. Bitcoin's a peaceful revolution. It's a gradual revolution. It doesn't like most Americans are not going to go off to, as much as I think is a cool idea, to literally build a citadel in the middle of Texas or something and have their own gun thing and protect it. Like that sounds awesome, but like most people aren't going to do that. So how can we build mental citadels, right? Like, well, we can have Bitcoin, right? And if we all have Bitcoin, then it really restrains what the government can do. Like basically we now have the power and the government has to come and ask us for stuff as opposed to the other way around. So that's what I believe in is like this peaceful revolution is like tilting the power back in favor of the individual away from the state. And I believe it'll make democracy stronger. I mean, it'll make basically any society stronger, but I think it makes democracy stronger. I think democracy's fatal flaw is fiat central banking. It gets mercilessly exploited and ends up being quite bad for a variety of reasons. And guess what? It'll be problematic for dictators. So from a human rights point of view, I think it's great.
Alex, thank you for coming on the show. Everybody, go get the book.
Thanks, man.
Check your and by the way, check your financial privilege.
Yeah, I had to. That was the only way I could do such a thing and spend so much time writing about this was I had to check my own financial privilege and just think about how lucky and fortunate I am and have been. So I hope others can do the same.
And you know, the one thing you say in the book is that, and you said it here too, is that no matter where you are, even in the world, there's layers of financial privilege, right? Man. I mean, everywhere. You know, it's not just not within America. Within America,
there's like 10 million Americans that are unbanked, and like they are less privileged than me. You know, but guess what? They can have Bitcoin. So It's
That's
a
right.
shield, man. It's not a sword. It's a shield. I guess what I'm getting at is it's a defense mechanism. It's not
Yeah,
not
by
a
the way, you
weapon.
have like so many things I'm going to tweet out that you've said so far that I've written down.
Sounds
Bitcoin
great,
is a
dude.
shield.
Well, I'll come back on sometime later, but I appreciate you
Absolutely.
having me. It's been really fun.
Where can everybody find you? So give your information.
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm at Gladstein, Gladstein. I'm also, you can find our work at the Human Rights Foundation, hrf.org. We have an incredible live conference that we do that's liberty themed. It's called the Oslo Freedom Forum. It takes place in Norway, which, by the way, is totally open, no restrictions, amazing country, beautiful place, awesome people. It's happening at the end of May 23 to 25. And it's going to have a killer Bitcoin program with a lot of awesome speakers. Jack Mallers is coming, Elizabeth Stark, Matt Odell, Lynn Alden, many others. So check out oslofreedomforum.com and check out href.org and, stay in touch.
Appreciate you. Thanks for coming on. Thanks, Alex.
My pleasure.